Commander Zexai stood on the bridge of his ship, looking at the blue planet below. His forearms moved across the control panels while his large black eyes studied the data streaming on his screens. Earth looked peaceful from space, with white clouds swirling over green and brown land masses. But Zexai knew better. The intelligence reports told a different story. The Vorthak Collective had been watching this world for months. Their scouts had mapped every major city, counted every military base, and analyzed every weapon system. The humans living on this planet were primitive by Vorthak standards. They still used chemical rockets to barely reach their own moon. Their weapons fired metal bullets instead of energy beams. Most importantly, they spent most of their time fighting each other instead of working together. Perfect targets, Zexai thought to himself. In his 200 years of military service, he had conquered 17 different worlds. Some species tried to negotiate. Others surrendered immediately when they saw Vorthak technology. A few fought back with courage, but they all fell in the end. Earth would be no different. The Vorthak High Command had classified humans as Grade C threats. This meant they were weak enough that a small invasion force could handle them easily. Zexai commanded only 50 ships and 20,000 soldiers. For most worlds, this would be a scouting mission. For Earth, it would be enough to claim the entire planet. His communication officer approached with the latest reports. The human armies were scattered across the planet, fighting wars in at least 12 different locations. They couldn't even stop killing each other long enough to face a real threat. Zexai felt almost sorry for them. "Begin Phase 1, he ordered. "Send the scout ships down. Let's see how these humans react to their first real enemy." High above the Pacific Ocean, Lieutenant Jake Morrison was having a routine patrol day. His F-22 Raptor cut through the clear sky at 30,000 feet. The ocean stretched endlessly below him, sparkling blue under the afternoon sun. Morrison had been flying for 8 years, but he still loved moments like this. Up here, the world's problems seemed small and far away. His radio crackled with the voice of ground control. "Eagle 1, we're showing an unknown contact on radar, bearing 270, altitude 35,000. Please investigate." Morrison checked his instruments. There was definitely something out there, but it didn't match any aircraft he knew. The radar signature was all wrong. Too big to be a fighter jet. Too fast to be a cargo plane. "Ground control, I have visual contact. This is unlike anything I've ever seen." The object in front of him looked like a metal triangle with smooth, curved edges. It moved without making any sound and left no exhaust trail. Stranger still, it seemed to shimmer and bend light around itself, like looking at something underwater. Morrison tried to radio the unknown craft using standard international frequencies. No response. He tried military channels. Still nothing. The triangle continued flying straight toward the California coast, completely ignoring him. "Unknown aircraft, you are entering United States airspace without permission. Change course immediately or we will be forced to intercept." The triangle suddenly stopped, not slowed down or turned around, but stopped completely in midair. Morrison had never seen anything that could do that. His training kicked in. If this was some kind of new weapon from an enemy country, he needed to act fast. "Ground control, the bogey has stopped moving. I'm going to make a close approach and try to identify." Morrison flew closer to the strange craft. Through his canopy, he could see what looked like windows along its side. Behind those windows, he glimpsed something that made his blood run cold. The pilot wasn't human. The creature had gray skin, 4 arms, and eyes like black marbles. It was looking right back at him with what seemed like curiosity. For a moment, both pilots just stared at each other across the impossible divide of space and species. Then the triangle moved again, but not like any aircraft Morrison knew. It tilted sideways and accelerated faster than physics should allow. Morrison pushed his throttles forward, trying to keep up, but the alien ship was already pulling away. "This is Eagle 1. Ground control, you need to scramble every fighter on the West Coast. We have a situation here that's way above my pay grade." But Morrison wasn't giving up. Whatever this thing was, wherever it came from, it was heading toward millions of innocent people. He armed his missiles and locked onto the target. The alien ship was fast, but his AIM-120 missiles were faster. "Fox 3, Morrison called out as he fired. The missile streaked toward its target, leaving a white trail across the blue sky. The alien ship did something impossible. It split apart, revealing that what Morrison thought was one craft was actually three smaller ones flying in perfect formation. His missile passed harmlessly between them. The three alien ships reformed into their triangle shape and continued toward shore. Morrison fired his second missile, but this time the entire formation simply vanished. 1 second they were there. The next second his radar showed empty sky. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. He had just encountered technology, beyond anything human science could explain. But his training took over. He had a job to do. Ground control. Targets have gone stealth. I'm continuing pursuit on last known heading. He pushed his F-22 to its limits, racing toward the coast. Below him he could see the lights of San Francisco starting to twinkle in the growing dusk. Somewhere ahead of him, 3 alien craft were approaching one of America's largest cities. Morrison's radar suddenly lit up again. The alien ships had reappeared, but now there were dozens of them rising from the ocean. The invasion had begun. On his ship high above, Commander HFY watched the encounter with growing concern. The human pilot should have fled when he saw superior technology. Instead, he had attacked immediately, and then continued pursuing against impossible odds. Even now, as more Vorthak ships rose from their hiding places under the water, the lone human fighter was racing toward them. Communications, HFY ordered. What is the human pilot transmitting? His officer played the intercepted radio messages. Morrison's voice came through clearly. This is Eagle 1 to all stations. We have multiple bogies rising from the Pacific. I count at least 30 unknown aircraft approaching the California coast. They are not responding to radio calls and have demonstrated hostile intent. I am engaging. HFY listened with growing amazement. The human wasn't calling for help or trying to escape. He was warning his people and preparing to fight a battle he couldn't possibly win. Morrison armed his remaining missiles and dove toward the alien formation. He knew he was probably going to die, but he also knew that every second he could delay them might save lives on the ground. His radio crackled with voices from other fighter pilots scrambling to join him, but they were still minutes away. The alien ship surrounded Morrison's F-22 like wolves circling prey. Energy beams lanced out, not trying to destroy him immediately, but testing his aircraft's capabilities. Morrison rolled and dove, using every trick he knew to avoid the attacks, but there were too many of them. A beam clipped his left wing, sending his plane into a spin. Morrison fought the controls, trying to regain stability, but he could feel his aircraft breaking apart around him. In those final seconds, Morrison made a decision that would haunt Commander HFY for the rest of his life. Instead of ejecting to save himself, the human pilot aimed his crippled fighter directly at the largest alien ship and pushed his throttles to maximum power. Morrison's F-22 slammed into the Vorthak scout ship at 600 miles per hour. The explosion lit up the evening sky like a second sun. Both craft fell burning into the Pacific Ocean. HFY stared at his screens in shock. The human pilot had died, but his sacrifice had destroyed one of the collective's most advanced scout ships and damaged 2 others. More importantly, his final radio transmission had given Earth's military detailed information about Vorthak capabilities and tactics. As rescue ships searched the wreckage for survivors, HFY found himself thinking about the human pilot's last moments. There had been no fear in Morrison's voice, no desperate pleas for mercy. Only determination to protect his people, even at the cost of his own life. For the first time in his long military career, Commander HFY began to wonder if the Vorthak Collective had made a terrible mistake. 3 months had passed since the first human fighter pilot crashed into HFY's scout ship. The memory still troubled the Vorthak commander as he walked through the ruins of Manhattan. His heavy boots crunched on broken glass and concrete debris. The tall buildings that once reached toward the sky now stood like broken teeth against the gray morning clouds. The Vorthak forces had taken most of Earth's major cities within the first month. Their energy weapons cut through human tanks, like paper. Their force shields stopped bullets and missiles. Their aircraft moved faster than anything humans could build. By all military logic, the war should have been over. But the humans refused to surrender. HFY stopped at an intersection where his soldiers had set up a checkpoint. The street was eerily quiet. No humans walked the sidewalks, no cars drove down the roads. The silence felt wrong somehow. In his experience, conquered populations eventually returned to their normal lives under occupation. These humans seemed to have simply vanished. "Report," HFY demanded from the checkpoint commander. "Sir, we have had no contact with civilians for 6 days. Our patrols find evidence of human activity, but we never see them directly. They move through the underground tunnels and abandoned buildings like ghosts." HFY studied the tactical display on his wrist computer. Red dots marked locations where his troops had been attacked in the past week. The pattern made no sense. The humans were hitting supply convoys, communication towers, and isolated guard posts, but they never tried to retake important buildings or strategic positions. "It is like they are not trying to win," HFY muttered to himself. "They are just trying to make us suffer." An explosion echoed from several blocks away, followed by the sound of energy weapons firing. HFY activated his comm unit. "All units, report status. Supply convoy under attack on 5th Avenue. We are taking heavy casualties." HFY grabbed his weapon and called for his personal guard squad. They moved quickly through the empty streets toward the sound of battle. As they ran, HFY noticed something that made his skin crawl. Eyes were watching them from broken windows and doorways. He could feel human presence everywhere, but he could never see them directly. When they reached 5th Avenue, the scene was chaos. A Vorthak supply truck lay on its side, burning. Energy bolts flew back and forth between his soldiers and unseen enemies hidden in the surrounding buildings. Bodies of both humans and Vorthak littered the street. "Where are they?" HFY shouted to his squad leader. "Everywhere and nowhere, sir. They fire a few shots from one building, then disappear before we can respond. By the time we reach their position, they are gone." HFY activated his helmet's thermal vision and scanned the buildings around them. He caught glimpses of heat signatures moving through the structures, but they vanished almost immediately. The humans were using the city itself as a weapon, turning every building into a potential fortress. A voice called out from across the street, speaking in accented English. "Vorthak, Commander. I know you can understand our language. I want to talk." HFY raised his weapon and aimed toward the voice. "Show yourself, human." A woman stepped out from behind an overturned car. She wore the green uniform of human military forces with sergeant stripes on her sleeves. Her face was dirty and tired, but her eyes burned with determination. She held no weapon, but HFY could see at least a dozen laser dots pointing at him from the surrounding buildings. "I am Sergeant Lisa Bennett, United States Marine Corps. You are trespassing on my planet." HFY almost laughed. This small, human female was challenging him while surrounded by the ruins of her own civilization. "Your planet belongs to the Vorthak Collective now. Surrender and your people will be treated fairly." Bennett smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Surrender? That's funny. You think you've won because you knocked down some buildings and killed some soldiers, but you don't understand what you're really fighting. I am fighting a primitive species that refuses to accept reality." "No," Bennett said, stepping closer despite the weapons aimed at her. "You're fighting an idea. The idea that people should be free to choose their own lives. The idea that some things are worth dying for. You can't kill an idea with energy weapons." Before HFY could respond, Bennett raised her hand and made a signal. Suddenly, the street erupted in explosions. The humans had planted charges in the buildings around them. Concrete and steel rained down as entire structures collapsed. HFY's force shield deflected most of the debris, but the shockwave knocked him to the ground. Through the dust and smoke, he saw Bennett running toward a subway entrance. His soldiers were firing at her, but she moved with practiced skill, using the falling rubble as cover. "After her," HFY commanded, but even as he spoke, he could see it was too late. The human had vanished into the underground tunnels that connected beneath the city. For the next 2 hours, HFY led his troops through the subway system, chasing Bennett and her squad. The tunnels were a maze of passages, maintenance areas, and abandoned train cars. The humans knew every inch of this underground world. They led the Vorthak forces deeper and deeper, always staying just out of reach. Finally, Zexhi's thermal sensors detected a large group of heat signatures in an abandoned subway station ahead. He motioned for his troops to surround the area. This time, the humans would not escape. The station was dark except for a few emergency lights. Old advertising posters hung from the walls, faded and torn. Zexhi could see shapes moving in the shadows, but something felt wrong. The humans were not trying to hide. "Sergeant Bennett," he called out. "You are surrounded. Come out and face." Bennett's voice echoed from the darkness. "We're already facing you, Commander. The question is, are you ready to face us?" Lights suddenly blazed throughout the station, temporarily blinding Zexhi and his soldiers. When his vision cleared, he saw that they were indeed surrounded, but not in the way he expected. The humans had turned the subway station into a fortress. Barricades made from train cars blocked the exits. Gun positions were hidden behind concrete pillars. Explosives were wired throughout the structure, but what shocked Zexhi most was the humans themselves. There were not just soldiers here. He saw elderly people, children, men and women in civilian clothes. They all held weapons, but they also held something else in their eyes. They were not afraid. Bennett stood on the platform, her rifle aimed at Zexhi's chest. Around her, dozens of other humans had their weapons trained on his squad. "This is our home, Commander. Every street, every building, every tunnel. We built this city with our hands and our dreams. You may have knocked it down, but you will never own it." Zexhi raised his own weapon. "You cannot win this fight. My soldiers have better armor and superior firepower." "You're right," Bennett admitted. "In a straight fight, you would probably kill all of us, but we're not planning to fight fair." She nodded to someone behind Zexhi. He spun around to see a young human male standing near what looked like a detonator switch. The boy could not have been more than 16 years old, but his hand was steady on the device. "That's Danny Rodriguez," Bennett explained. "His father died in the first week of your invasion. His mother died last month defending a hospital. He volunteered for this mission because he wants his little sister to grow up free." Zexhi realized with growing horror what the humans planned to do. They were going to collapse the entire subway station, killing themselves along with his squad. "You would die just to kill a few Vorthak soldiers?" "We would die to prove a point," Bennett corrected. "Every time you kill one of us, 10 more humans learn what you really are. Every time you destroy one of our cities, 100 more communities prepare to resist. You're not just fighting the people in this room, Commander. You're fighting the idea of human freedom, and that idea is bigger than all of us." Rodriguez looked at Bennett, waiting for her signal. The other humans in the station began to sing something. Zexhi did not understand the words, but he could feel the emotion behind them. These people were saying goodbye to life itself, but they were not afraid. For the second time since arriving at Earth, Zexhi found himself face to face with humans who valued something more than their own survival. The pilot who crashed into his ship, and now these people who were willing to die to protect an abstract concept. "Wait," Zexhi said, lowering his weapon. "There must be another way." Bennett studied his face for a long moment. "Maybe, but that depends on whether you're willing to learn something about what it means to be human." The singing continued, echoing through the dark tunnels beneath the ruined city. Zexhi realized that everything he thought he knew about warfare was wrong. The Vorthak Collective had conquered 17 worlds, but they had never faced an enemy like this. They had never fought people who could turn their own deaths into weapons. As he looked into the eyes of the humans surrounding him, Zexhi began to understand that this war was far from over. In fact, it might be just beginning. 6 months after the subway station encounter, Commander Zexhi found himself leading hunting parties through the wasteland that used to be Detroit. The Vorthak controlled all the major cities now, but the humans had simply melted away into the countryside. They lived in abandoned factories, old mines, and forest camps that his sensors could barely detect. The resistance was growing stronger instead of weaker. Every week brought reports of sabotaged supply lines, destroyed communication, towers, and ambushed patrol units. The humans fought like no enemy HFY had ever faced. They struck without warning and vanished before his forces could respond. His current mission was to find and eliminate a resistance cell that had been particularly troublesome. Intelligence reports said the group was led by a human female named Carol Thompson and a male called Paul Wright. They had turned the ruins of Detroit into a graveyard for Vorthak vehicles. HFY crouched behind the wreckage of an overturned truck, studying the abandoned automotive factory ahead. His thermal scanners showed no heat signatures, but he had learned not to trust technology alone when hunting humans. They had too many ways to hide their presence. "Squad leader," he whispered into his comm unit. "Position your troops around the perimeter. These humans are clever. They will have multiple escape routes planned." His soldiers moved like shadows through the rubble-strewn streets. The factory had been silent for months, but HFY could feel eyes watching him from the broken windows. Somewhere in that maze of machinery and conveyor belts, humans were waiting. Inside the factory, Carol Thompson watched the alien soldiers through her binoculars. She had been an automotive engineer before the invasion, designing fuel systems for cars and trucks. Now she used that same knowledge to build bombs that could destroy Vorthak armor. "They're surrounding us," she whispered to Paul Wright, who lay beside her on the factory's second floor. 12 soldiers, standard formation." Wright nodded. He had been a military contractor before the war, training soldiers in urban combat techniques. His beard was gray and his hands were scarred from months of fighting, but his eyes remained sharp and alert. "Let them come. We've prepared a warm welcome." Below them, hidden throughout the factory floor, 37 humans waited. In silence. They were not professional soldiers. Amanda Foster had been a high school teacher. Greg Miller had worked as an accountant. Kevin Brooks had run a small restaurant. But the invasion had turned them all into fighters. Thompson checked her watch. 3 minutes until the timer activates. Everyone needs to be in position. She had spent weeks preparing this trap. The factory's old assembly line had been converted into a deadly maze. Hidden explosives were wired to motion sensors. Fuel lines had been rerouted to create fire barriers. Even the overhead cranes had been rigged to drop heavy machinery on unsuspecting enemies. But Thompson's greatest weapon was not any device she had built. It was the knowledge that these people would follow her plan even if it meant their own death. They fought not for money or glory, but for the simple right to exist as free human beings. HFY entered the factory through the main entrance, his weapon ready. The silence felt oppressive. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight streaming through broken skylights. Old machinery cast strange shadows across the floor. His soldiers spread out behind him, checking every corner and hiding place. Their energy weapons hummed softly, ready to fire at the first sign of movement. HFY had fought in dozens of battles across 17 worlds, but something about this place made his skin crawl. A soft clicking sound echoed from somewhere ahead. HFY froze, recognizing the noise as a timer counting down. "Trap," he hissed, into his comm. "All units evacuate immediately." But it was too late. The factory erupted in a series of coordinated explosions. Thompson had not just planted bombs randomly. She had calculated the exact placement needed to bring down specific sections of the building while leaving others intact. The Vorthak soldiers found themselves separated into small groups, cut off from each other by walls of flame and twisted metal. "Now," Wright commanded through his radio. The human resistance fighters emerged from their hiding places like ghosts. They attacked with weapons that HFY had never seen before. Thompson had built guns that fired exploding bolts made from automotive parts. Wright's people used motorcycles as mobile weapons platforms, racing through the factory at high speed, while firing at alien soldiers. But what disturbed HFY most was how the humans coordinated their attack. They communicated through hand signals and subtle movements, working together like a single organism. When one fighter fell, others immediately covered his position. When ammunition ran low, civilians risked their lives to bring more supplies to the front lines. Amanda Foster, the former teacher, had positioned herself near the factory's main power junction. When HFY soldiers tried to use their energy shields, she cut the electrical supply that fed the building's metal framework. Suddenly, the aliens' defensive systems began to malfunction. The humans are using our own technology against us, Zexai realized with growing amazement. They have studied our equipment and found its weaknesses. Greg Miller, the accountant, had been tracking Vorthak supply movements for months. He knew exactly when and where the aliens would need reinforcements. His people had sabotaged the roads leading to the factory, ensuring that help would not arrive in time. The battle raged for 3 hours. Zexai found himself trapped on the factory floor with only 2 of his soldiers still alive. The humans had turned the industrial machinery into weapons, using everything from hydraulic presses to welding torches against the invaders. During a brief lull in the fighting, Zexai heard voices coming from a nearby office. He crept closer and saw something that shocked him to his core. Kevin Brooks, the restaurant owner, was treating the wounds of a captured Vorthak soldier. The alien was badly injured and clearly dying, but Brooks worked on him with the same care he would show to his own people. "Why?" Zexai called out, unable to contain his confusion. "Why do you help your enemy?" Brooks looked up from his patient. His face was streaked with dirt and blood, but his expression remained calm. "Because he's hurt, and I can help him. It's that simple. But we are trying to conquer your world." "That doesn't make you less of a living being," Brooks replied, continuing to bandage the alien's wounds. "My grandmother always said that how you treat your enemies shows what kind of person you really are." Zexai stared at the human in disbelief. In the middle of a battle for the survival of his species, this man was showing mercy to an alien soldier. It made no tactical sense. It served no strategic purpose. But Brooks did it anyway because he believed it was right. The fighting resumed, but Zexai's heart was no longer in it. He had come to Detroit expecting to crush a group of primitive rebels. Instead, he had found people who combined tactical brilliance with moral principles that his own species could not understand. When the battle finally ended, most of the resistance fighters had escaped through Thompson's carefully planned evacuation routes. The factory lay in ruins, and Zexai had lost 8 of his 12 soldiers. Technically, the Vorthak had won by holding the battlefield, but it felt like a defeat. As his surviving troops called for medical evacuation, Zexai walked through the wreckage. He found evidence of the humans' incredible ingenuity everywhere. They had turned car parts into communication devices, used industrial chemicals to create smokescreens, and converted assembly line robots into automated weapons. But they had also left behind something else. In the factory's break room, someone had written a message on the wall in several languages, including Vorthak script. "We do not fight because we hate what is in front of us, but because we love what is behind us." Zexai read the words several times, trying to understand their meaning. The humans were not driven by anger or revenge. They fought because they wanted to protect something precious to them, their families, their freedom, their way of life. As he waited for rescue, Zexai found himself thinking about Kevin Brooks treating the wounded Vorthak soldier. No species in the galaxy showed mercy to their enemies during active combat. It was considered both tactically foolish and strategically dangerous. Yet the humans did it routinely, as if compassion was more important than victory. For the first time in his long military career, Commander Zexai began to wonder if the Vorthak Collective was fighting an enemy they could never truly defeat. How do you conquer people who refuse to abandon their principles even when facing extinction? How do you break the spirit of beings who show kindness to those trying to destroy them? The transport ship arrived to collect his wounded soldiers, but Zexai remained behind for a few more minutes. He needed to understand what he was really fighting. The humans had superior numbers, inferior technology, and no hope of winning a conventional war. Yet they continued to resist with a determination that defied all logic. As he finally boarded the transport, Zexai realized that the Vorthak Collective had made a fundamental error in their assessment of human capabilities. They had measured human strength in terms of weapons and technology, but the real power of humanity lay in their refusal to become something they were not, even when it would be easier to surrender. 18 months had passed since the invasion began. Commander Zexai stood on the observation deck of his command center, looking out over what remained of Chicago. The Vorthak Collective had achieved total military victory. Every human government had fallen. All organized armies had been destroyed, the major cities lay in ruins, and the surviving human population had scattered into small groups hiding in wilderness areas. By every measure that mattered to the Vorthak High Command, Earth was conquered. Yet Zexhai felt no satisfaction as he watched his patrols move through the empty streets below. His forces still suffered casualties every day. Supply convoys still needed heavy escorts. Communication towers still got sabotaged with disturbing regularity. The humans had lost the war, but they refused to accept defeat. Lieutenant Commander Vextar approached with the daily casualty reports. "Sir, we lost another patrol yesterday. 5 soldiers killed by improvised explosives near the old university district. No human casualties recovered from the scene." Zexhai took the datapad and studied the numbers. In the past month alone, his forces had lost nearly 200 soldiers to human resistance activities. These were not major battles or strategic engagements. They were small, seemingly meaningless attacks that served no military purpose except to remind the Vorthak that the war was not truly over. "Have we identified the resistance cell responsible?" "Intelligence suggests it may be connected to a group operating from the ruins of Mercy General Hospital. The leader appears to be a human female who was a medical doctor before the invasion." Zexhai knew about Dr. Helen Wright. His files contained dozens of reports about her activities. She had been treating wounded humans in the hospital's basement levels for over a year. What made her case unusual was that she had also been treating wounded Vorthak soldiers. "Prepare a squad for reconnaissance," Zexhai ordered. "I want to see this human doctor for myself." 2 hours later, Zexhai led a team of 12 soldiers through the rubble-strewn streets toward the hospital. The building had been heavily damaged in the early days of the invasion, but parts of it were still structurally sound. His sensors detected multiple heat signatures in the lower levels, confirming that humans were using it as a shelter. As they approached the main entrance, a young human male emerged from behind a pile of concrete debris. He carried no weapons and wore civilian clothes, but his eyes held the same determined look that Zexhai had learned to associate with human resistance fighters. "Are you here for medical treatment?" the young man asked in heavily accented Vorthak. "Dr. Wright treats everyone regardless of species." Zexhai was so surprised by the question that he hesitated before answering. "We are here to investigate reports of illegal resistance activities." "The only activity here is healing," the young man replied. "Follow me, but please keep your weapons lowered. There are patients resting." Against his better judgment, Zexhai followed the human into the hospital. The corridors were dark and filled with the smell of antiseptic and human medicine. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls. But what shocked Zexhai most was the sound of voices speaking in both human languages and Vorthak dialects. They descended 2 flights of stairs to the hospital's basement level. Here, Dr. Helen Wright had created something that defied everything Zexhai understood about warfare. In a large room that had once been a storage area, humans and Vorthak were lying side by side on makeshift medical beds. Dr. Wright looked up from a patient she was examining. She was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and tired eyes. Her medical coat was stained with blood from both species. When she saw Zexhai and his soldiers, she showed no fear or surprise. "Commander," she said, recognizing his rank insignia. "Are any of your soldiers injured? I have space available." Zexhai stared at the scene around him. A human nurse was changing bandages on a Vorthak soldier's arm. Nearby, a Vorthak medic was helping Dr. Wright treat a human child with a broken leg. The patients from both species were talking quietly to each other, sharing stories and water. "What is this place?" Zexhai demanded. "It's a hospital," Dr. Wright replied simply. "People get hurt in war. I fix them if I can. But these are enemy soldiers. Why do you treat Vorthak wounded?" Dr. Wright paused in her examination and looked directly at Zexhai. "When I became a doctor, I took an oath. I promised to preserve life and relieve suffering, regardless of who the patient might be. That oath doesn't stop being important just because there's a war going on." Zexhai walked between the beds, studying the patients. Many of the humans showed signs of severe malnutrition and untreated injuries. The Vorthak soldiers looked confused but grateful for the medical attention they were receiving. Some were sharing their military rations with human patients. "This makes no strategic sense," Zexai said. "You are helping your enemies recover so they can return to combat against your own people." "Maybe," Dr. Wright admitted, checking the vital signs of a young Vorthak who had been injured in an explosion. "But I've learned something interesting over the past year. Soldiers who have been treated here rarely commit atrocities against human civilians. It's hard to see someone as a monster after they've saved your life." A commotion near the hospital's entrance interrupted their conversation. Zexai heard shouting and the sound of running feet. His second-in-command's voice crackled through his comm unit. "Sir, we have a situation. Human resistance fighters are approaching the hospital in large numbers." Dr. Wright's expression became concerned. "They're probably coming to evacuate the patients. There have been rumors that your forces were planning to raid this facility." "My soldiers will defend themselves if attacked," Zexai warned. "And my patients will die in the crossfire," Dr. Wright replied. "Commander, I've treated over 300 Vorthak soldiers in this hospital. I've saved dozens of lives that would have been lost otherwise. Surely that has some value to your people." The sound of weapons fire echoed from the upper floors. Zexai's soldiers had engaged the human resistance fighters who were trying to enter the building, but instead of joining the battle, he found himself studying the faces of the patients around him. A young Vorthak soldier named Rexian was sharing his water bottle with an elderly human woman. When the shooting started, he instinctively moved to shield her with his body. Nearby, a human teenager was helping a wounded Vorthak officer sit up so he could breathe more easily. "Sir," Vextar's voice came through the comm again. "The humans are requesting permission to speak with you directly. They say they want to negotiate the evacuation of their wounded." Dr. Wright looked at Zexai hopefully. "Will you talk to them?" Against every principle of Vorthak military doctrine, Zexai agreed to the meeting. 20 minutes later, he found himself face-to-face with Matt Baker, a civil engineer who had become one of the resistance leaders in the Chicago area. Baker was accompanied by his 16-year-old son, Tony, and an elderly woman named Rose Martin. "Commander," Baker began, "we know your forces could destroy this hospital and everyone in it. But Dr. Wright has been treating your soldiers as well as ours. She's shown that humans and Vorthak can work together peacefully. We're asking you to let us evacuate our wounded without a fight." Zexai studied the three humans. The father and son looked tired and underfed, but their eyes held the same determination he had seen in every human resistance fighter. The elderly woman seemed frail, but she stood straight and met his gaze without flinching. "And if I refuse?" Zexai asked. "Then, we'll fight," Tony Baker replied, speaking for the first time. "But a lot of good people will die for no reason. Your people and mine." "We're not asking you to surrender or retreat," Matt Baker added. "We're asking you to show the same mercy that Dr. Wright has shown to your soldiers." The battle upstairs had stopped. Both sides were waiting to see what would happen next. Zexai realized that he faced a choice that would define not just this moment, but his understanding of what it meant to be a soldier. In all his years of military service, no enemy had ever asked him to be merciful. They had begged for their lives, offered bribes, or threatened revenge. But these humans were appealing to something deeper. They were asking him to recognize their shared humanity, even across the divide of species and conflict. Dr. Wright emerged from the basement, followed by several patients from both species who could walk. "Commander," she said, "these people have become friends over the past months. They've shared food, stories, and hope. War doesn't have to destroy everything that makes us who we are." Zexai looked at the mixed group of humans and Vorthak standing together. Many were supporting each other physically, helping wounded comrades from both sides. For the first time since arriving on Earth, he saw what peace might look like. "You have 2 hours to evacuate your wounded," he announced. "My soldiers will not interfere." Matt Baker's relief was visible. "Thank you, Commander, this won't be forgotten." As the humans began organizing their evacuation, Tony Baker approached Zexai. "Sir, I want you to know something. My grandfather fought in World War II. He always said that the measure of a soldier wasn't how well he could kill, but how well he could choose not to kill when he had the power to do so. 10 years had passed since the last Vorthak ship left Earth's orbit. Commander Zexhai, now retired from military service, sat in his study on the Vorthak homeworld, writing his final report about the human conflict. The walls around him were lined with books and data crystals containing everything he had learned about human behavior during the war. The Vorthak High Command had officially declared the Earth campaign a success. They had demonstrated their military superiority and gathered valuable intelligence about human capabilities. But Zexhai knew the truth. The collective had retreated not because they had accomplished their goals, but because they could no longer afford the cost of occupation. The humans had never stopped fighting. Even after losing every major battle, they continued their resistance, with a determination that defied all military logic. More importantly, their conduct during the war had begun to affect Vorthak soldiers in ways that troubled the High Command. Soldiers who had served on Earth returned home asking uncomfortable questions about the nature of warfare and the treatment of civilians. Some refused assignments to other conquest missions. A few had even resigned from military service entirely, claiming they could no longer participate in aggressive wars after witnessing human courage and compassion. Zexhai's personal logs from the Earth campaign had become required reading in Vorthak military academies, but not as victory accounts. They were studied as warnings about enemies who fought for principles rather than territory. His computer chimed, indicating an incoming message. Zexhai opened the communication channel and felt his breathing stop. The image on his screen showed a human female in diplomatic attire, standing in what appeared to be a spacecraft. "Commander Zexhai," the human said in perfect Vorthak. "My name is Ambassador Jennifer Walsh. I represent the United Earth government. We would like to discuss the possibility of peaceful relations between our species." Zexhai stared at the screen in shock. He recognized the name Jennifer Walsh from his intelligence files. She had been one of the resistance leaders in Detroit, working closely with Carol Thompson and Paul Wright. Now she was speaking as Earth's official representative to alien civilizations. "How did you obtain this communication frequency?" he asked. "Your former soldiers gave it to us," Walsh replied with a slight smile. "Several Vorthak veterans of the Earth campaign have maintained contact with humans they met during the war. They suggested you might be willing to serve as a liaison between our governments." The idea that Vorthak soldiers were secretly communicating with humans shocked Zexhai almost as much as Earth's sudden technological advancement. "How is it possible that you have developed interstellar travel so quickly?" "Necessity is a powerful motivator," Walsh explained. "When you left Earth, we knew you would eventually return, or that other alien species might threaten our world. We had to advance rapidly to survive. But we also learned something important during your occupation. Technology alone doesn't determine the outcome of conflicts between civilizations." Zexhai thought about the resistance fighters he had encountered. Jake Morrison ramming his fighter into a scout ship. Lisa Bennett willing to destroy herself to make a point about freedom. Kevin Brooks treating wounded enemies with the same care he showed his own people. Dr. Helen Wright creating a place where former enemies could work together. "What do you want from the Vorthak Collective?" he asked. "Nothing," Walsh replied, which surprised him. "We're not seeking revenge or demanding reparations. We want to establish trade relations and cultural exchange programs. We believe both our species could benefit from peaceful cooperation. After everything the collective did to your world, you want to be friends?" "We want to prevent future wars," Walsh corrected. "Commander, your people taught us that the galaxy contains species with technology far beyond our current capabilities. We could spend the next 1,000 years preparing for the next invasion, or we could work with other civilizations to create something better." Zexhai found himself remembering the young human pilot who had sacrificed his life to protect his people. Morrison had fought bravely, but what would he have accomplished if that same courage had been directed toward exploration or scientific advancement instead of warfare? "The High Command will never agree to treat humans as equals," Zexhai warned. "The collective views other species as either subjects or threats." "Then maybe it's time for the collective to evolve," Walsh suggested. Your own reports describe humans who showed mercy to their enemies and maintained their principles even when facing extinction. Those same humans are now building starships and developing technologies that could benefit everyone. Over the following months, HFY found himself serving as an unofficial ambassador between Earth and the Vorthak Collective. The process was slow and difficult. Many Vorthak leaders still viewed humans as primitive creatures who had been lucky to survive their encounter with superior technology. But HFY's detailed reports about human behavior during the war gradually changed opinions. The High Command became curious about a species that could inspire such loyalty in its soldiers and such respect in its enemies. When human ships began appearing in neutral space, demonstrating technologies that rivaled Vorthak capabilities, curiosity turned to genuine interest. The breakthrough came when a Vorthak exploration ship suffered catastrophic engine failure in an asteroid field. The nearest vessel capable of rendering assistance was a human research ship, commanded by Captain Steve Collins, the same Marine who had held a hospital for 6 days during the Chicago siege. Collins not only rescued the Vorthak crew but also invited them aboard his ship for medical treatment and repairs. During their 3-day journey to the nearest space station, the Vorthak officers experienced something unprecedented. They were treated as honored guests rather than potential threats. Dr. Nancy Peterson, now serving as the ship's medical officer, treated the injured Vorthak with the same care she had shown human patients during the war. When the Vorthak captain asked why humans showed such kindness to former enemies, Peterson replied with words that would later be carved into the memorial walls of both species. Because kindness is stronger than hatred. Because cooperation builds more than conquest ever could. Because we choose to be better than our worst instincts. The rescue mission became a symbol of what peaceful relations between the species could accomplish. Within a year, formal diplomatic ties were established. Within 5 years, joint research projects were producing technological advances that benefited both civilizations. HFY often found himself thinking about the humans he had encountered during the war. Matt Baker had become Earth's chief engineer for interstellar construction projects. His son Tony was now a captain in Earth's diplomatic fleet. Dr. Helen Wright had established the first interspecies medical academy, training doctors from dozens of different worlds. But it was the memory of those who had died that haunted HFY most. Jake Morrison, who had shown that courage could inspire others across the barriers of species and time. Lisa Bennett, who had proven that some principles were worth more than life itself. Kevin Brooks, who had demonstrated that compassion could survive even in the depths of war. On the 10th anniversary of First Contact, HFY stood before a gathering of human and Vorthak dignitaries at the dedication of the Galactic Peace Memorial. The structure contained the names of all those who had died during the Earth campaign, from both species, carved into walls of crystal that reflected light from distant stars. Ambassador Walsh, now a close friend despite their wartime history, joined him at the memorial. "Do you think they would be proud of what we've built?" she asked, gesturing toward the names on the wall. HFY thought about the question for a long moment. "I think they would be amazed that enemies could become allies. But I also think they would remind us that peace requires the same courage that war demands. The courage to trust, to forgive, and to choose hope over fear." As he looked at the stars, visible through the memorial's transparent dome, HFY realized that the humans had taught the galaxy something profound. True strength was not the ability to destroy, but the wisdom to build. True victory was not conquest, but the creation of something better than what existed before. The war for Earth had ended with the Vorthak Collective's withdrawal, but the real victory belonged to an idea that had spread across the galaxy. The idea that different species could choose cooperation over conflict, understanding over hatred, and hope over despair. In his final log entry, HFY wrote, "I came to Earth as a conqueror and left as a student. The humans taught me that the strongest civilizations are not those with the most powerful weapons, but those with the most powerful dreams. They showed me that the future belongs not to those who can destroy their enemies, but to those who can transform them into friends." The haunting truth that HFY had discovered was simple yet profound. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been their technology or their tactics. It was their unshakable belief that tomorrow could be better than today, and their willingness to sacrifice everything to make that belief a reality.